You are the most content-spoilt generation that has ever roamed this world. Whether it be a proliferation of TV channels, whether it be Amazon Plus, whether it be Netflix, whether it be Snapchat, whether it be Instagram, you're all so spoiled. Never has there been a generation like you. How does that manifest itself? It means that your appetite for the banal, the hackneyed, the mundane is zero, absolutely zero. For content to rise above that, it has to be very, very strong. Everyone in craft and trade tries to do the best that they can. In photography, if you're a professional, the factors I've just elucidated on have issues for people like me because you're fairly tough to please these days. How do we tackle it? Some people tackle plurality with plurality. They go on a trip and they come back and they show 200 pictures to their friends. That's a very grave error. I don't know any photographer that can spend 2 weeks and take 200 pictures that are worthy of showing to the world. The world needs to see less, not more. If I can take 4 pictures a year, I'm a happy man. 4. So just remember that to begin with, that less is more. We live in a very noisy environment. This picture, the world doesn't need to see. It's taken from a higher elevation than the animals. All this picture shows is whoever took it paid for an expensive lens, paid for a very clever chap that knew where the cheater kill was, and took a picture that's not art, it's just reportage. I can say all these nasty things about that picture because I actually took it. It is everything that is perhaps wrong about wildlife photography. It had become dull. How does one tackle that dullness at a time when you have so much appetite for fresh material? A key word in my life is immersion. Immersion recently, as I'm sure many of you have watched, a box cassette series like Breaking Bad. It took cinematography to a new level. But immersion didn't start with series like Breaking Bad. It started a long time ago. There was a photographer called Robert Capa, who was a very brave man that, with the Canadian-American troops, landed on Omaha Beach on D-Day and to film D-Day. And he said, if a photograph isn't good enough, it's because you're not close enough. So true. He was talking about intimacy and immersion. And these themes have continued. You've all seen, I'm sure, this film. Chivo, who shot it, won the Oscar for cinematography. And there were so many shots of DiCaprio or Thomas Hardy that was taken maybe 2 or 3 yards from their face. So you almost felt that you were a trapper in those years. You felt you were there. You felt you were part of things. That is what immersion is about. And that will be one trend that moves forward in photography past your generation onto the next generation. And it's something that I totally embrace. The problem is with wildlife, how do you do that? Because a lot of these things might have a go at you if you're too close, or there's regulations that say you shouldn't be too close. What you do is what you do every day. You do your homework, you do your research. You find your way around the riddle. This picture is maybe slightly more interesting. Bisons are primal. They're like something out of the Ice Age. And I did a lot of research. This picture was taken 3 weeks ago in Yellowstone. And the most important characteristic of a bison is the enormity of its head. And the only way that I could show that was not from 100 yards away. I had to be very close to the bison's head. And given some of the big bisons are very dangerous, it just meant I couldn't be there. So I employ remotes. I employ sophisticated technology and predictive analysis to work out where the animals are going to go. Animals are always much more lazy than us. They do the same things every day, and they tend to use as minimal amount of energy as possible. Maybe a lot of you can relate to that on a day-to-day basis, I'm not sure. But this picture, I'm not there. I'm 50 yards away, but I've placed my remote control, and I'm working in the same way that Chivo did in The Revenant, with a very wide-angle lens so I can be 2 or 3 feet away from the animal. And so therefore I can capture every kind of characteristic in his head. One of the world's great photographers was Ansel Adams, and he said, the lens looks both ways. What he was suggesting was obviously the lens looks out, but it also looks in. It looks into your soul and your heart as well as your eye. And by and large, the greater the amount of magnification, the less that dynamic works. You've got to be fairly close. Sometimes, by being close, I have my odd moment. I just watched The Revenant, actually, on the film when this happened, and it was all rather...
Oh, shit. Don't move, David.
You must never move. If this happens to you tomorrow, don't move, okay? What happened next? Well, I'm still here. The most important thing is never to move. You've got to, it's a bit like playing poker, and I'm sure it's illegal here, so you shouldn't play poker, but you just got to stay in the game as much as you can. But as a result, you can get that degree of intimacy that you wouldn't if your preparation and maybe a little bravery hadn't allowed a degree of intimacy and proximity. And with that picture of the bear, because my line of eyesight, importantly, is lower than the bear's. So if you've got a picture where you're standing and you're looking down at an animal, you never really get the character or the personality of an animal, whereas at this basis, we're right in parallel with each other. And when you go and take pictures, always remember that. Try and get your cameras as low as possible. It applies to giraffes as well, very tall animals, but we don't really care any longer that they're 17 foot tall. We know that. We want to do something different. We want a picture that's slightly ethereal and has a degree of serenity. I thought, wouldn't it be great to get a giraffe running? So I built a ladder out of a Jeep, and I lay in the ladder, traveling at 40 miles an hour, chasing this giraffe into the sunset. It looks like I'm a long way away from the giraffe, but actually I'm very, very close to the giraffe. It's just a big wide-angle lens. But it results in something that's slightly more evocative and gives the audience a picture that grabs their attention and maybe holds onto their attention in a way that a traditional picture of a giraffe wouldn't. This is the biggest gorilla, oldest gorilla that's left in the world. I took it 2 weeks ago up in the mountains in Rwanda. He's called Gahunda. He's only actually 4 years younger than me, which shows what an outdoor life and no alcohol does to you. He looks so much younger than me, I think, on the basis of that picture. They're wonderful animals, gorillas, and it's great and so refreshing to see that the two places where they reside the most in Africa have been two African countries that have had dreadful civil wars in the DRC and Rwanda, and particularly in Rwanda's case, it's enjoyed a remarkable road to redemption, and part of that road to redemption has encouraged the gorilla population to grow. A swan is such a beautiful, elegant animal, serene. You never get Swan Lake being produced in a muddy pond in Sussex. You want Swan Lake choreographers always had swans in snow, in a medley of snows. And I thought, how can I do a swan justice? I want to have lots of whites, I want ice, I want mountains. And I thought the best place to do it was Japan. So I went there specifically just to photograph swans. It's a funny thing to do, but in this day and age, that's what you have to do to get pictures that are evocative and elicit interest, again, from a sport community such as ourselves now. Polar bears are tough. I think I've become the first person to ever take a selfie of myself in a polar bear's eyes. If you look closely, that's me in the eyes of the polar bear. I had an Inuit behind me. This is taken on the north shore of a slope of Alaska. And he was saying, "Don't worry, David, I know this one. He comes from a good family. You'll just be fine." But I was about 2 foot away. And again, my eyes are below his eyes, which is so important to convey that intimacy in the photograph. I do like to transgress. I'm a bit of a troublemaker. I like to go to places where I can break rules, because we live in an era where breaking rules is fine. The posh word, I think they call it in Silicon Valley, as a disruptor. It's just a rule breaker, basically. If you rip up the rule book. If you're going to photograph elephants, you've got to get out of the car. That allows you to get that kind of picture. I do lose the odd camera to elephants. Whenever that happens, the most important thing is the card with the photos survive. I don't really care about the camera and the lens. It doesn't really matter. And with lions, they're brilliant with my cameras. I was in Africa about 3 weeks ago and actually did lose 2 cameras in one day. When we found them the next day, they all still worked. But again, placing those cameras on the ground, using remote control. I'm sure many of you remember the opening scene in one of the best films that's ever been made was Ridley Scott's Gladiator. And before that carnage that took place in that big battle, there was a lovely scene that lulled viewers into a sort of false sense of serenity with Russell Crowe's hand going through the long reeds of grass and the early morning light kicking up. And that gave me an idea of how I could create a kind of ethereal image with a lioness. Every woman in this room, if they were an animal, they'd be a lioness because they're such intelligent, beautiful animals. So I put that kind of thought together, and that's what I got. That was my kind of Ridley Scott Gladiator type image. So we talked about intimacy, immersion. What's the other thing that I anticipate is going to happen in photography? If we cast our mind back to presidential election night, those key 4 hours from 10 o'clock in the evening to about 2 o'clock in the morning, US time, her ultimate denouement, his moment of validation. Who were the photographers that got those best images? Those photographers were not the best photographers in the world. Those photographers were the people that had earned the access, had spent the time, which maybe in his case showed a lot of patience, to be in the right place at the right time to take the photographs. I was asked recently at Augusta, and any of you play golf, I was very honored to be asked to take the last picture, sadly alive, of Arnold Palmer. I knew that probably would, that official picture would be the last picture of him alive. No one else was there. It was just me with those 3 greats of golf. And if you're American football fans, one of the great franchises in American football is an artisan club for the people called the Green Bay Packers, which is based right up in Wisconsin. And their ground is one of the great iconic grounds of American sport called Lambeau Field. It hosts 92,000 people, and it's freezing cold. And I was very honored. They played a big game against the New York Giants in the playoffs, minus 25, and I was asked to photograph it for the Sports Illustrated magazine. And that picture that I took, I wanted to convey the enormity of it, but I was right underneath the goal. That picture is not necessarily about me as a photographer, it's about access. It's about putting yourself in the position to take the photograph. This picture was earned partly as a result of an old schoolboy of yours, because Duke of Cambridge, who very kindly wrote the foreword to my book, gave the president of China one of my photographs when he was over on a state visit. And this allowed me to have a little bit of muscle into the Foreign Office and get access to put a cage up in northern Siberia on the Russian-Chinese border and buy a lot of chickens, and then in the safety of my cage, get a lot of man-eaters to come around the cage. It's a powerful picture taken in very cold conditions, but it came as a result of preferential access. Bangladesh is a dangerous place these days. This is where they bring the ships in to be broken up. The Bangladeshi government won't allow you to go in from the road because they're worried you'll document some maybe issues that cross the border from a human rights perspective. So I had to go on a fishing boat and jump into the sea and approach this scene where it shows the enormity of one of these tankers versus the little people. Again, it's about access. It's not necessarily about the camera. A camera is a piece of metal. When any of you that are photographers, don't obsess about the camera. Think about yourself. Never think the camera is brighter than you. You are brighter than the camera. This is a great fun picture. I thought, well, why not bring a wolf into a bar in America? Because they let all sorts of things into bars in America. And the guy behind the bar on the left that looks like he's killed about 10 people. And then I wanted everyone else to behave as if wolves in the bar were the most normal thing that went on in America. And I wanted, it all came together, but only after long conversations with the Montana government. Again, access, preparation, homework. This is just the goal hanging to take the picture at the end of the day. So, Detroit, if any of you haven't been, I'm sure many of you haven't been, but Detroit's a great place because it's abandonment. Abandonment, to me, is much more interesting than growth. I'm more interested in Detroit, a great old American city, than I am maybe in Dubai. I wanted to create a kind of visual double take, something that was visceral and asked questions rather than gave answers. But I wanted to hire a gang in Detroit But if any of you go to Detroit and go to your hotel and say to the concierge, can I hire a gang? They say, well, we don't really do that, sir. We can get you a reservation for dinner, but we don't really hire gangs. So I thought the only thing I could do to get the gang was to try and find some marijuana, and I don't smoke marijuana. And eventually when I found this man, I said, actually, I don't really want any marijuana. Can you take me to your leader? So I was taken to some back quarter of Detroit, and then I said, can I hire your gang for a photo shoot? And I did mention that there was a Playboy centerfold that was also going to be involved in the Tiger. And then we all threw it together. There was one moment before we took the photograph, I said, there's one rule here, no guns. So can you all please empty your pockets? And 18 guns went on the table in this Irish bar in Detroit. I've just been in Nigeria last week, into one of the toughest places in Nigeria. This is me getting access to the chief. And so this is one of the most intense days I've had in my life in the last 3 or 4 years. It's a place called Makoko, which is a slum in Lagos, which is the 5th biggest city in the world. And I was the first white guy in there for about 5 years. And this was a week ago last Sunday.
And you're standing like a strong man. Quite noisy here.
This was the end picture I took. There's a degree of, in a complex situation, there's a degree of reductionism within this photograph. I'm eliminating lots of factors and homing in on one. At a time where nationalism and regional elitism have overtaken globalization, and there's a fair degree of what I would describe as patronizing commentary on disenfranchised communities, I wanted to emphatically show that places like West Africa have dignity. They might not have what we have, but they have family values and they have dignity. And we should be careful in some of our rhetoric right now when we're pigeonholing places. Look how beautiful those two people are. And when I was there, all I saw was happiness and beauty. This is a picture that changed my life. It was taken in South Sudan. I think a key test to any great picture is the longevity of the engagement between the photograph or the piece of work and the person that's looking at it. You can look at it and look at it and look at it. I earned the picture because it was a lot of work. It was a lot of guns up there, and it was slightly dangerous. And you can't go there again now. But there's an awful lot going on in the image, and that's so core to what good photography is about. There is a conservation message in everything that I do. I'm very fortunate to travel the world to see some great things. I also see some horrible things. You as a generation will grow up thinking that the previous generation to you have done a shocking job on this planet. We don't own this planet. We are tenants. We share this planet with some extraordinary animals. The elephant, where the population is 10% of what it was. The rhino, where we're down to the last 26,000. And you saw what happened in Paris last week. After the Second World War, there were 450,000 lions in the world. There's now 13,000. So remember, as you leave tonight, the collective responsibility we have in this planet. We share it with others. I don't blame the poachers, and that might be a controversial thing to say, but if you live in Mozambique and you earn $1,000 a year, and you're given $5,000 to be part of a food chain that gets an ivory tusk to the border, you could be forgiven for taking that trade on. You could say, well, I'm looking after my family for the next 5 years. The people I blame, of course, is the end market. And it's about educating an end market that snorting rhino horn does absolutely nothing for you whatsoever. When people like me move on, it will be your generation that must build on the momentum that is currently happening, partly through one of your old boys, to make things change and to raise awareness. Thank you for your time. Thank you very much.